Hello and welcome to round 4 here at the World Championship. I'm Tim Willoughby, joined with Luis Scott Vargas and from R&D, Jackie Lee. And it's modern day here at the World Championship. We've had our Modern Masters draft, but we got plenty more modern action for you now with Modern Constructed. You've heard a little bit about the decks, but now we're going to get a chance to go and see the players down in the feature match area for our first round of Modern. Hello and welcome to round 4 of the World Championship here in PAX in Seattle. We're in the feature match area ready for some Modern, but let's meet our players.
Steve Rubin, United States, top pro points at large.
Owen Turtenwald, United States, top pro points at large.
Hello and welcome to round 4. I'm Tim Willoughby here, joined with Hall of Famer Luis Scott Vargas and Jackie Lee from R&D. And we've got a great match for our first match of Modern here. Two very, very explosive decks that we're going to see.
Yeah, this is the Affinity Boggles matchup, green-white hexproof. And it's not as interactive of a matchup as many in Modern because basically it's whether Steve Rubin can get all his combo pieces together before Owen kills him, because neither deck is really suited to play control in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, we see there a Blinkmoth Nexus to start things off for Owen Turtenwald. He's got a Vault Scourge in play on turn 1, and both of these decks, they're really planning on getting as many permanents in play as fast as possible, right?
Yes.
So they're on the other side of things, the first sort of hallmark Boggle card, I suppose, for Steve Rubin, a Glade Cover Scout there. It's got hexproof, so he's going to be able to enchant that up with as much as he would like. But I guess that Owen Turtenwald at least has blockers in this matchup.
He does, and more importantly, he's got a turn 2 cranial plating on a Vault Scourge. So that's one of the key draws for Affinity is an early plating, and attacking with a turn 2 plating is pretty big, because now, even though Steve has the turn 1 Glade Cover Scout, if he doesn't have a bunch of auras, including a Daybreak Coronet, he's going to have a really hard time racing.
Yeah, both of these decks have a little bit of lifelink to work with, so we're going to see some life totals going right up and down. What are the cards that potentially can cause some interaction here?
Well, we see it happening right now. Steve is equipping his Glade Cover Scout with a Rancor and an Ethereal Armor. So that thing is getting quite large. It has First Strike, but he doesn't yet have the Unflinching Courage, which would give him the lifelink that Owen does have on his Vault Scourge.
So a little bit of a lopsided race to begin things with here. I guess that both of these players do have some cards that can really swing things. If a Spellskite comes down, is it too late now?
It's not too late. Even though the Glade Cover Scout's quite large, a Spellskite now would stop from any additional auras, except for Daybreak Coronet. Daybreak Coronet is the card that you can't actually put it on a non-aura creature, so Spellskite wouldn't be able to stop it. And that's the card that Steve's really looking for. But Owen's got a huge clock here. If you notice, that's an Inkmoth Nexus picking up a plating, which means that Steve Rubin does not have a lot of time to actually try to close out this game, and even though he can present an unstoppable threat, it's not the fastest. This Glade Cover Scout's not going to deal 16 damage in one turn.
Yeah, we can see the 6p there under Steve Rubin's life total. That means he's taken 6 poison counters, and I guess that Owen there, a little bit wary of the fact that there could be some life gain from Steve Rubin. This way around, he can play around that, he can just get in the poison damage and end this first game fast, and that's exactly what we see happening.
That is what happened.
Wow, buckle in, guys. I think that we might be able to see quite a few matches of Modern here, because that first game, it basically took no time at all. We're going to be watching plenty more Magic very, very soon, but right after these messages.
Watch the best players in the world battle for fame and glory on October 16th to 18th at Pro Tour Battle for Zendikar. See the impact of the new set on Standard and Booster Draft, with complete video coverage streamed on twitch.tv/magic. Outfit your Magic collection with the newest Battle for Zendikar accessories from Ultra Pro. The full array of card sleeves, deck boxes, playmats, and portfolios of your favorite Magic artwork will be available at ultrapro.com on September 26th.
Hello and welcome back to the World Championship. We're still in round 4 and we're going to get a chance for a live look-in now on one of our other matches. Now, I hope that you like Boggles because we got plenty of it in the feature match area here. More green-white hexproof, this time in the hands of one Ari Lax, the winner of Pro Tour Khans of Tarkir, but this time he's up against Merfolk.
Yeah, and Ari and Steve being on the same deck is not surprising, given they tested together. They're playing against the only Merfolk deck in the field, though. Strasky here, trying to assemble as many Lords as possible. And the fact that he's got 4 Merfolk in play already is a fairly good sign for him.
Yeah, I spoke to Strasky a little bit yesterday to find out about his preparation, and one of the things that he mentioned was that in Modern he believes that there are lots of good decks. You should play a deck you know really well. This is a deck that he knows and has played a lot, hence the fact that he's on Merfolk here, and facing down a very, very big core Spirit Dancer by the looks of things.
It's kind of funny, when preparing for Worlds, I told Ifro and Shahar, you know, Strasky's been playing this Merfolk deck online. He might actually play it at Worlds, and turns out that's what he ran with.
And there we have it, another match wrapped up. Another game wrapped up, should I say. Andre Strasky able to swing right in there with his Merfolk, absolutely thumping the Hexproof deck there.
And that is a power of a deck that you know very well in Modern. There's so many interactions between the different decks that it's really valuable to have that.
Yeah, I think that I spoke to a few people that almost were sort of looking at it and saying, yes, you can start trying to predict what other people are playing, you can try and level things, but actually, when you get right down to it, that you can just send yourself a bit crazy trying to do that. So this way round, play the deck you know, play it well, and hope that that'll see you through. So we get a chance to look at our third match, and this is Andre Strasky's teammate for this event, Paolo Vitor Damarosa. He's on Twin and up against Mike Cigrist there, and we see another Affinity deck.
Yeah, people brought their beatdown decks here. Both Boggles and Affinity are trying to close out the game pretty quickly. Paulo, one of the few control standouts here. And this is pretty similar to the deck he played at Grand Prix Charlotte just a couple weeks ago, or a couple months ago now, where, yes, he's got the twin combo, but the Grixis part of it does help him assemble a more controlling game.
And this is another example of Paolo playing that same mentality that Strasky's worked with of, let's go with the deck that I know, rather than necessarily the deck that I think might be powerful, but that I don't have time to learn inside and out.
Well, when you look at the testing team that Paulo had with Strasky, Tiago, and himself, and they all are playing different decks, that indicates to me that they didn't break it. They didn't come up with, we think this deck is the best. They're all like, well, we should all just play the deck we like the best, and they are. I mean, they're all playing the decks that they've played the most.
And that will especially happen in Modern, where the card interactions are so important. Additionally, the top 8 is going to be standard, so the value of the team, I think, primarily comes from that, and for Modern, it makes more sense for the players to be playing the decks with which they're comfortable.
That's certainly something that Owen Turtenwald was championing when we spoke to him the other day. He's obviously shuffling up for his game 2, already up a game against Steve Rubin. Mike Cigrist start here with Affinity a little bit slower than Turtenwald's, it must be said. He's got the cranial plating, though. He's got an Inkmoth Nexus to suit up, but potentially a few different, so a lot more interaction available for Paolo Vitor Damarosa here.
And Cigrist's actually under a clock. If Paulo has a Splinter Twin in his hand, he could just win on the next turn, with Deceiver Exarch. So Cigrist has to be content with the fact that he's not going to win the game this turn. He's just going to have to hit with this Edge Champion for a bunch of damage, but it gives Paulo a free turn to do whatever he wants with. And even if Paulo doesn't have a twin, there's a decent chance he has something like Cryptic Command, which would just buy him another turn.
So Damarosa here dropping to 7 with the use of a fetch land, getting that 4th mana. He does have both of his red and his blue mana available here, meaning that he will be able to cast Splinter Twin if he wants. And immediately there, by the land that he's fetched, we get a bit more information about what he might be doing with this Splinter Twin deck. He has got some black mana in his deck.
Yeah, I would be terrified if I were in Cigrist's position, just knowing that I don't have any way to interact with the Splinter Twin if he happens to has it.
Well, luckily for Cigrist, Paulo does not have any red cards in his hand, so he's in the twin mode of like, well, time to draw Splinter Twin, because it looks like he's got a Cryptic Command. He can buy some time with that, and he's just got to hope to peel Splinter Twin, because he's getting behind enough on board. The control part of the game is just not going to work.
I mean, the version of Splinter Twin that does use black potentially has a few more interesting options available to it. If he's got Kolaghan's Command, that potentially very powerful against Affinity, able to ding a couple of creatures all at the same time. And by the looks thing, he has just the 1 copy of that, along with 2 Cryptic Command.
Kolaghan's Command is quite good in this matchup, but once there's an Etched Champion in play, it is a little tougher, because that champion's generally going to be immune to it. And even if Paulo had a command here to kill that cranial plating, the Ravager would grow larger, just put it on the champion, and then that would be unstoppable.
So on just 7 life here, Paolo Vitor Damarosa has to be worried about how many turns he has left. But Mike Cigrist, 20 life, it really doesn't matter how much life you're on when you're up against Splinter Twin. Any turn from here, the game could simply end.
And sometimes it can be tricky trying to use Cryptic Command to stop an attack when you're facing down Inkmoth Nexus. But in this case, seeing as Paulo doesn't have any poison yet, it's unlikely he's going to get poisoned out this turn.
I mean, it's worth noting that Mike Cigrist does have sufficient black mana that he can equip that cranial plating at instant speed if he wishes, potentially making Inkmoth Nexus a little scarier.
What I imagine is going to happen here is Paulo's just going to tap both of Cigrist's creatures with Cryptic Command and draw a card, because it just gives him another shot at finding Splinter Twin and keeps him alive for another turn. Again, the Nexus is just not going to be able to kill him this turn.
Tap draw.
And there we have it. All of those creatures getting tapped now. Mike Cigrist does have the option of animating an Inkmoth Nexus, but it's not going to do a whole lot.
Yeah, if he's got nothing else to cast, he might as well get in some free poison damage.
For Cryptic Command, that was pretty predictable.
Yeah, an awful lot of different options available for the Cryptic Command, of course. One of the things that sells it as being such a powerful card in Modern. Not that many 4-mana cards that are sort of real standouts in Modern because it is such an aggressive format, but Cryptic Command well worth it, alongside, of course, the Splinter Twin itself.
Yep.
Okay, looks like our main matchup between Steve Rubin and Owen Turtenwald is just kicking off. Given what we know about how quickly that can go, I think we should probably jump back to it fairly fast if we can. Steve Rubin, of course, on the play in this second game, having succumbed to Affinity. And he's got a turn 1 Glade Clever Scout. And there's that turn 1 Volt Scourge from Owen Turtenwald again. This could be a close one.
It'll be interesting to see their sideboard choices because these are both such linear decks. They're very susceptible to very powerful sideboard cards that are very linear.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things Steve Rubin was saying about the Hexproof Auras deck that made it so strong is the fact that it has lots of great sideboard options. He's got a Stony Silence in the sideboard. Just the one, though, and that's certainly very good against Affinity. As things stand here, he got an enchantment for his first Hexproof creature. His plan is going okay. He just needs to kind of hope that Owen doesn't have the crazy start that he had before. So let's talk a little bit about what a linear strategy is, just for the folks at home. If you had to sort of characterize what Steve's trying to do, it's always the same, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so kind of like we were talking about mono red before, the more lightning bolts you have, the more it becomes kind of like a combo deck in itself. You add them all up and they become something better than the sum of its parts. So similarly, the affinity cards, you're trying to amass as many artifacts as possible, and cards like cranial plating will derive maximum value from that, giving your creature +1/+0 for each artifact you have.
There we see the cranial plating. And I guess one of the powerful things about Affinity is that pretty much all of the cards in Affinity are also looking to get lots of artifacts in play. We see the Steel Overseer that's in play. It wants to have a bunch of artifact creatures in play. It's a very straightforward plan that says if I deploy a lot of cards, I'm probably doing something good.
Mm-hmm. Similarly, Steve is playing the Glade Cover Scout, and it's just a 1-mana, 1/1 hexproof. He wants to stack as many enchantments on it as possible. His opponent cannot target it because of the hexproof, and the goal is to just trample over, gain life from that unflinching courage that he's got on it, and hopefully just win the race because they're not going to be interacting with each other.
Yeah, these decks are kind of like ships in the night. They just pass by each other, and you just count out the damage and see who's ahead. Because there's really not much either deck can do to interact. They can race. Maybe Owen can chump block. But for the most part, these decks are just trying to assemble their specific combinations and just kill the opponent.
It's kind of like those old samurai movies when you just see two guys and then they clash and then you see one of them fall down.
Yep. I mean, that is what is happening here. And in this case, because Steve was on the play, he was able to kind of get ahead, whereas last game it was Owen who had the turn 2 plating.
Yeah, there's certainly a matchup where winning the roll is important, but also both of these decks, potentially ones that can benefit from the Vancouver Mulligan rule.
I wonder if that impacted, these players' deck choices. The fact that we've seen, 4 Boggles and 6 Affinity or something like that in this field of 24. These are the decks that do like this new Mulligan rule.
And we see there Owen Turtenwald able to pump up his team with Steel Overseer, get stuck in. He has to try and stay in this race, but with the life gain on Steve Rubin's side, that might be a little tough.
Yeah, it's difficult because last game he had the cranial plating draw, which was fine. He could put it on his poison Inkmoth Nexus and get through for 10 poison counters, which is enough to win. In this case, he has the go wide creature draw of the Affinity deck, so it's going to be difficult for him to get in as much damage on a single poison creature.
We just see a suppression field come into play for Steve Rubin. This one that Owen Turtenwald had to have a read of, certainly one of the more interesting sideboard options. It means that any activated abilities are going to cost 2 more to play unless they're mana abilities. fetch lands, equipping, using that Steel Overseer, all of these are going to be really taxing on Owen Turtenwald's mana, and Affinity not known for having lots and lots of mana sources.
The fact that Owen has, a couple Steel Overseers in play is definitely blunted by the suppression field, and it obviously impacts Ravager greatly because Ravager is one of the cards with the most activated abilities.
Yeah, I've always looked at Affinity as a deck that has a lot of potential energy because the Arcbound Ravager can sacrifice to put the counters on any creature. If there's a suppression field in play, then that just means there's a lot of friction on any of his plays.
And a Daybreak Coronet here for Steve Rubin might be closing the door for Owen Turtenwald. +3/+3, first strike, vigilance, and lifelink. We're in build your own Acroma territory here. That hexproof creature is now just terrifyingly large and is going to be very, very difficult to stop. It has trample from unflinching courage, and you can see there Owen Turtenwald not looking super happy about being in the feature match area in this exact spot.
Yeah, Daybreak Coronet is one of the big payoffs for this strategy that Steve's employing, and the fact that he's able to get one down here is making things pretty tough for Owen. Owen can't interact, he can't kill, and he can't race that Glade Cover Scout. He can't even really chump it because of trample.
So there you see Owen having to pay the 2 to activate his Steel Overseer. His team is a little bit bigger. He is able to get stuck in here, and there will be a bit of life gain from that Vault Scourge. So Owen up to 9 life off that attack. Is that going to be enough to stop Steve Rubin's terrifying single creature in play?
Presumably not, but we'll see if Owen's got something going on here.
Looks like that's a second Daybreak Coronet, so...
And a second Ethereal Armor. Those things stack up pretty fast. And we're going to be seeing a game of 3 from that one, but there's plenty more magic going on. Just to let you know, a result from our back table, from what we saw of that a match between Mike Cigrist and Paolo Vitor Damarosa. Cigrist did win the first game. We didn't see anything from Paolo there in terms of Splinter Twins. But we're going to get a chance to jump across very shortly for a look at one of our other matches on the table. This from our King of the Hill table, Seth Manfield, of course, who did manage to go 3-0 in the draft portion. He's against Martin Dang, and he is playing, surprise, surprise, Hexproof.
Yeah, this one team they all played the same deck, so they're all pretty confident in it, and it could be a good deck for the field, though. I actually like where Living End is at against Boggles, because Living End tends to do pretty well against the creature-based decks, and Boggles, for the purposes of Living End, is a creature-based deck.
Now, can you describe to me what it is that Living End's trying to do and why that is?
What Living End's mainly trying to do is fill its graveyard with creatures because all of them cycle, and then just cast one of the Cascade cards like Violent Outburst or Demonic Dread, which cascades into Living End, which swaps all creatures in play and all creatures in graveyard. So everything in play gets exiled and put in the graveyard. Everything in the graveyard gets exiled and put into play. And you see Martin Dang up a game. I wouldn't be surprised if, because when both decks do their thing, I think Living End comes out on top.
And there we see the Daybreak Coronet being got rid of there by Martin Dang. He had the ability to just main that Glade Cover Scout, not nearly as exciting now, and Spider Umbra going away as Seth Manfield blocks. All of a sudden, Seth Manfield in all sorts of trouble here, and some big creatures on the side of the board for Martin Dang.
Yeah, the fact that Beast Within can actually interact with enchantments is very relevant here. You saw Martin take what looked like a winning position for Seth, a Daybreak Coronet, and turn it into a lone Glade Cover Scout with a Beast token, which I think are forced to play defense now.
Yeah, I guess that's one thing about the Auras deck, is that it's not necessarily one that's too happy playing defense unless it's got a Daybreak Coronet, Vigilant, Lifelink, First Striker, etc.
Right. When you look at Seth playing 2 Auras and saying go with no attacks, what is his expectation to draw every turn? And every turn, the Auras deck is not great at drawing cards off the top of its deck, just because so few of its cards are very relevant.
So it could be that our King of the Hill table is going to be moving fairly fast. Seth Manfield is actually someone who's played Hexproof before and had a little bit of a rough ride of it at a previous GP. So it may well be that he wasn't as comfortable with the deck as Steve Rubin, and here he's facing down potentially lethal attacks here.
Yeah, it looks like Seth is going to opt to go to 1 but kill the Fulminator Mage instead of jumping in front of Street Wraith, which does leave him with at least the Beast and then a Rancor in hand. So he just needs to draw a Daybreak Coronet. I mean, that's the card that matters here.
And update.
This is my favorite part of the Living End deck, by the way. The hard cast Deadshot Minotaur.
Yeah.
Go.
Brings me back to Ravnica Limited.
Yeah.
And just a quick update for you from our back tables. We've got our
He drew the
first
Daybreak
match result.
Coronet. That's the
Wow.
swing. That all of a sudden that beast attacks for 10 and just actually it looks like it might just ends the
Yeah.
game.
Is that exactly 10?
I guess there's a chump block here, but then Seth gets to go up to 11 life. Yeah, that was an insane topic.
Wow.
And this the reason that you run these cards, so that you can draw them. Daybreak Coronet off the top, exactly what Seth Manfield needs to keep him in this game here. Martin Dang putting another creature in his graveyard, but not really the way that he wanted to. I mean, I guess that the cool thing about Living End in this matchup is that even if he casts Living End and lets Seth Manfield get back some creatures, he's still getting rid of all of those auras that are on those creatures, which are really the important bit.
Be curious to know if he has a violent outburst.
Well, unfortunately for Martin, Rancor actually is worded such that the creature doesn't have to die, just Rancor has to go to the graveyard. So
Right.
Rancor's pretty hard to kill. But Martin did draw a Violent Outburst, so he actually now gets to swap the position of all the creatures in play and in graveyards, which does mean he's not dead here. He's able to chump and then draw Violent Outburst. So all of a sudden, we're going to see this board change drastically.
As it has been. These have been some huge swings.
Yeah, these decks don't do the middle ground all that well.
Though they do the red zone fairly well. We see there Martin Dang cascading through. The only spell he's going to be able to hit in this deck is likely to be that Living End. Occasionally you see Living End decks with a few very powerful sideboard options that you could cascade into, but I'm guessing that that's not the case here.
Yeah, it'd be tough to imagine what you'd want against Boggles so badly that you'd make your Living End plan not work.
And there is the Living End. Let's take a look at a slightly new board.
So shuffling the cards from Cascade, but and because we came in midway, we don't actually know how stocked these graveyards are. It could be interesting to see what ends up here.
Effectively, we're going to get a replay of what creatures got removed the first time round on the first Living End.
Yeah, Martin's going to get some triggers too. He's got Architects of Will, which lets him rearrange the top 3 cards of his or his opponent's library, which is kind of nice. And you see those
That's good.
Rancors coming back.
Another question is going to be, what does Seth Manfield have to play on his creatures post-combat? The fact that Dong was able to play Living End in the middle of his attack step, invert the creatures from the graveyard to the battlefield, it just means that Manfield's not going to get an attack this turn, and Dong could potentially swing for the win if he doesn't have a lifelink enchantment or something like that.
Unfortunately for Martin, it looks like the first Living End did kill a lot of creatures, so Seth does have 3 creatures out now, one of which is a Core Spirit Dancer, which means these Rancors are going to draw him some extra cards. So it's going to be tough for Martin to win this turn. He's got to find something, which Architects of Will does help with.
Certainly tempting to use the Fulminator Mage here to get rid of a land before you get into post-combat, just so that there's one less mana for Seth Manfield to do anything with if he is drawing cards with that core.
I'm gonna do it like this. Okay. And then you trigger yours.
The 2 Architects of Will going one in each direction here.
And it looks like on our main table there's mulligans down to 5 going on. Not necessarily what you want to be doing in any match, let alone in the feature match of the World Championship,
Well,
but it does mean we get to see some more Magic here.
Luckily for Steve Rubin, even though he's going to 5, he's playing a deck where 5 cards and 7 cards aren't that different if those 5 cards are the right ones. It's not an attrition game. He can beat Owen with 5 cards very easily. They just have to be Daybreak Coronet, a Glade Cover Scout, some lands, and another Aura.
Yeah, because of the Vancouver Mulligan rule, it's almost like he's going to 6 when he's going to 5, just because he's able to see the card that he can potentially draw and play on turn 2.
But in the meantime, there we see that play from Martin Dang, getting rid of one of Seth Manfield's lands, and now he gets post-combat, and Seth has a little bit of thinking to do.
Yeah, this actually doesn't look great for Martin here. Because of that 10-point life gain that Seth had, he's now not going to die to these 3 creatures, and the Rancors coming back mean that Core Spirit Dancer is going to draw a bunch of cards, and Seth's going to have some fairly large creatures in play.
Yeah, Core Spirit Dancer, powerful enough that even though it is not hexproof, it doesn't necessarily fit with the deck's sort of overall scheme in that regard. It does draw you a lot of cards, and it will be a very sizable threat by the end of this turn. And it looks like on our main table, Owen Turtenwald, he's got the first turn and has plenty of permanents in play on just the very first. I think we should probably head back and see how that one goes. We'll let Martial Arts Spotter let us know what's going on in the Martin Dang match. It looks to me like it may be going to a game 3.
I think that's the most likely scenario, yes.
So let's just head back and get the big full-screen version of our main feature table between Steve Rubin and Owen Turtenwald. Just a reminder, this is now game 3, and there's a Spellskite in play already for Owen Turtenwald. How much does this change this matchup?
Well, two really bad things have happened for Steve Rubin here. First of all, he didn't play a creature on turn 1, which means he has to have a core Spirit Dancer, but still, turn 2 and turn 1 are very different. And worse, there's a Spellskite in play. Unless he's got his one copy of Stony Silence or one of his Sealer Primordiums, that Spellskite's going to stop Steve from playing enchantments on any of his creatures. Spellskite can just steal those enchantments. Yeah,
you can pay 1 blue or 1 Phyrexian mana, i.e. 2 life, just to retarget any spells that might target a creature. As it happens, Spellskite can quite happily say, all of those auras are just going to go on me now.
I can see why its creature type is horror.
Yeah.
So there is a creature of sorts available for Steve Rubin. He fetches a Dryad Arbor there.
Yeah, another dimension to the green-white deck is that its fetch lands can get Dryad Arbor because it's forest, which helps protect against cards like Liliana the Veil, and just gives you another target for auras if you don't have one.
And there's a second land. So Steve Rubin, one piece of the puzzle is okay, and a Sealer Primordium. We might have a game on our hands.
Yeah, that killing the Spellskite gives Steve a chance. He's still a little behind here because Owen has a bunch of permanents in play and Steve has yet to play a creature, but at least he's got the tools he needs to assemble a creature. Unless, of course, Owen has another Spellskite.
Go.
Well, it looks like he does.
I may have seen his hand. So yes, that is going to be, I think, somewhat problematic for Steve here.
Good.
Since as good as Core Spirit Dancer is, casting enchantments into a Spellskite is really not where you want to be.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Owen Turtenwald willing to pay a pretty hefty amount of life to make sure that none of those auras get to stay on Steve Rubin's side of the board.
And here's another sideboard card from Owen, a Whip Flare, dealing 2 to each non-artifact creature, which it's funny because it's the best card in a situation like this, but you have like a 1-turn window to cast it usually.
18. Go.
That is so unfortunate for Steve, having had that Arbor Dryad in play.
Yeah, killing the Dryad Arbor is just incredibly good because Steve didn't play a land the last turn, so clearly doesn't have another one before his turn. And Steve's under the gun for a lot of reasons. The only thing in his favor is that Owen's not attacking for very much damage. He doesn't have a Plating or a Ravager or anything yet, so it's just Signal Pest Ornithoptering in for like one at a time, but that's not going to last very long.
You see there the Whip Flare, one of the very few cards that exist that has some non-italicized flavor text there, incomplete.
Oh, wow.
That important to the Phyrexians that they wanted to just make sure it was nice and bold. And I'm sure Steve Rubin felt it every letter of that one as it killed off both of his creatures there. And Owen Turtenwald just rocking and rolling here. There's a Blood Moon, and that's going to make life very difficult for Steve Rubin indeed.
Owen sided in a pair of cards, Whip Flare and Blood Moon, that are incredibly good if you're ahead or if you're on the play, and a lot less good on the draw. I wouldn't even be surprised if Blood Moon's not even anywhere in the deck on the draw, just because you need to cast it before Steve starts casting his spells.
Yeah, Blood Moon, an interesting card, because this is a format where after this round, players will have full access to each other's deck lists, meaning that it's something that there's a little bit more room to be played around than perhaps in a more regular Modern tournament.
We talked about how there wasn't much interaction. Owen's just playing the full control deck here. He's got Spellskites, Whip Flares, and Blood Moons. He's just turning into mono-red control.
I mean, to be fair, Steve Rubin does have more of an interactive deck in this game than he has done in either of the prior ones too. There we saw a Path to Exile dealing with Spellskite number 2. Now all he needs to worry about is the fact that he's really not got much in the way of mana.
It's an interesting board that Owen has right now. He doesn't have much in the way of threats, but that makes sense because he sideboarded out some of his linear strategy cards for these Whip Flares and Blood Moons.
Yeah, the space has to come from somewhere. And
exactly.
And Steve Rubin used his one window of opportunity before he didn't have any white mana left to use that Path to Exile. From now on, he's going to have to draw a basic land if he wants to tap for either green or white.
Yep.
Steve Rubin has a whole 2 plains and 1 forest in his deck. So for Steve Rubin to win this game, he has to draw one of his 2 plains or his 1 forest, and then play a creature to put auras on, and then put auras on the creature, which that's a tall order, especially since Owen did play at Arcbound Ravager, so Owen's not looking
got
to
2
draw
of
out
them.
this game.
Yeah, 16 points of damage is not going to take Affinity too long to muster together. And even if Owen is on go slow a little bit, if he's not necessarily doing things quite as effectively as normal, not too big a worry here.
Funnily enough, Steve did draw the Stony Silence, which would have been great a couple turns ago, but at this point is not going to impact the game a ton.
Yep.
Stony Silence there, stopping activated abilities of artifacts, so including things like Darksteel Citadel. But as it stands, it's just languishing in Steve Rubin's hand as Owen Turtenwald whacks in for quite a lot of damage here.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised to see Owen's Ravagers eat most of Owen's creatures or Owen's board here, because Owen wants to put Steve on a 2-turn clock here.
Take it.
Ready?
And that's exactly what he's achieved there. Steve Rubin down to 8 and extends the hand. That a victory for Owen Turtenwald. And we're going to get a chance to see a little bit more of the match that we had a little bit of a look in on earlier. Let's jump back and see exactly how things are going on our back table between Paolo Vitor, Damarosa, and Mike Cigrist. So just a quick reminder, on the left of our screen, although it might look like he's playing a Fairies deck, something we know that Paolo does like to play, that is a Splinter Twin deck for Paolo Vitor Damarosa with a Vendilion Clique in play. On the other side of things, Mike Cigrist, he's got plenty of manlands, 1 Blinkmoth and 2 Inkmoth Nexus, and a big Arcbound Ravager there.
Yeah, it looks like there's some action earlier this game because Ravagers don't grow to 4/4 without that. So it's going to be interesting to see if Paulo can deal with the Ravager and then deal with the follow-up Nexus, which will be a 5/5 thanks to the Ravager, at the very least.
This is game 3, so this match that we're watching now, the end of this game will be the conclusion of the match. We'll get a chance to find out who is the victor here in coming turns. And it's kind of an interesting one that there is a lot of range for the Splinter Twin deck to change between being a very controlling deck and actually sometimes applying a little bit of beatdown with the likes of things like this Vendilion Clique.
Yeah, I've enjoyed playing blue control decks in Modern just because of the flexibility.
And there we see a Pestamite just adding to the fairy plan. We know that Paolo Vitor Damarosa is comfortable playing fairies, and right now he seems to be in a pretty good spot, all told.
Yeah, between Kolaghan's Command and Cryptic Command, Paulo has got the tools he needs to control the game. And how he has to sequence those is the tough part. I mean, Splinter Twin is a very tough deck to play, and playing against Affinity can be also very difficult.
No attacks.
Yeah, control and also Affinity. They both have these complex lines of play, but the control decks primarily come from sequencing. They're in the hand as opposed to on the board.
And here you see an Etched Champion, which Paulo has 1 turn to deal with, because it doesn't have Metalcraft right now. You need Metalcraft to give it protection for everything, and Etched Champion pretty much makes the control plan untenable once it gets protection. So Paulo's got to decide whether he wants to Cryptic to bounce it, or Kolaghan's Command it, though if he commands, then that does give Cigrist some options too.
So Paolo Vitor Damarosa here, lining up his mana, having to play with his lands behind his spells here, as is the new rule for feature match area, but that's not slowing him down too much. And he still has 5 power in the air if he wants it.
Cigrist can't have felt great about tapping out for Etched Champion and leaving it kind of unprotected there, but I imagine that it was his best option given that he's got a bunch of cards in hand, so he can't have a ton of cheap spells there.
You see there, the player of the year, Mike Cigrist, just sort of calmly considering his options. I mean, the nice thing about playing the aggro deck, I suppose, is that you can just put it out there and say, right, what can you do about all of these threats that I've got?
That's painful. Paul had to cast Pyroclasm to kill the Etched Champion, or try to, and that's going to kill both of his creatures.
Wow.
You got to do what you got to do, though, and I think that he's correctly identified exactly what you were saying, Luis, that if the Etched Champion did get a chance to stay alive, then it was going to be something that he simply wouldn't be able to deal with. And a follow-up Kolaghan's Command able to both get back Pestamite and kill off that Arcbound Ravager, leaving this board pretty quiet.
3.
Yeah, Cigrist does have an Inkmoth Nexus, a second Inkmoth Nexus, and a Blinkmoth Nexus, but as we saw before, he doesn't have a ton of mana, and with Paulo at 3 poison and 10 life, the turn of just attacking with 2 Nexi does not seem like a turn you'd be too happy with.
We can see Kolaghan's Command there. That a card, obviously, with a lot of flexibility, but much of it very, very good against Affinity. You can destroy an artifact, deal 2 damage to a creature or player. Both of those pretty relevant. And then making discards or getting back creatures also absolutely things that are within the range of what this Splinter Twin deck is looking to do.
The printing of Kolaghan's Command really changed Modern. It just gave so many tools to the decks that can play it, and the matchup against Affinity definitely got better. It actually, funnily enough, leads you to shaving sideboard cards against Affinity because you're better against them naturally because of Kolaghan's Command.
Yeah, all 3 modes are things that you really want to be doing in Modern. To have them all on one card is good.
Absolutely. I mean, with the likes of Snapcaster Mage to get back, with the likes of, I mean, all of the combo pieces effectively for the Splinter Twin deck being something that you just get an extra bite of the cherry at, it's certainly an entertaining option.
And Cigrist, again, he's activating this Nexus, but he knows Paulo has a Pestermite. He got it back with Command, so this doesn't seem like the best long-term plan. It just Cigrist does not appear to have better options.
Paolo having a little think here. And there's that Pestermite.
So he's tapping the Blink Moth Nexus.
Yeah, we're now in the stage of the game where Grixis Twin has successfully sort of stabilized on board, has plenty of lands in play. It has to be a sort of moderately scary time for Mike Cigrist at this point because he's gradually running out of cards in hand here.
He is, and Cigrist actually is Affinity without any colored mana, and it looked like his hand has like at least 1 Galvanic Blast, and if not 2, and then maybe a Thought Cast. So he could be pretty short on ways to actually cast his spells, which is funny because usually he's the deck that dumps his hand, and Paulo right now is having a lot more success at that.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, Paolo Vitor Damarosa able to play basically all of his spells. The one exception, I suppose, being that he does need to have a creature in play before he casts his Splinter Twin. But I mean, at that point, the game is basically over. And there is a Deceiver Exarch. So Paolo Vitor Damarosa here, 1 draw away from being able to win the game.
And it's the same position as he was in game 1, where he didn't draw it. But the difference is here is Paul's definitely not dead. He's very much alive, just on board. He's got a Cryptic Command in his hand. He's got you know, a decent board, whereas Cigrist doesn't have much. He's got a Vault Scourge. So Paulo's in a much better position because, yes, if he draws the Twin, he probably wins. But if he doesn't, he could just draw a bunch of random spells and just win the game the fair way. Cigrist is at 12 life.
I mean, it's Modern. Who really wants to win the game the fair way?
Most of the people in this tournament, actually, there are a lot of fair decks running around here.
I mean, the fairway is always a good plan B.
And so here we see Paolo Vitor Damarosa finding his triple blue and 1 colorless mana for Cryptic Command. And in this case, it's acting as Repulse, bouncing a creature, and drawing a card at instant speed.
Both things I love to do.
Yeah, the Cryptic Command is a fun card to play, and the fact that Cigrist didn't play anything, Paulo figured he might as well fire off the command and try to draw a Splinter Twin before Cigrist finds colored mana. Because if Cigrist does find a card like Glimmer Void, then all of a sudden his hand becomes unlocked, and he has a lot more resources than Paulo does. It's just right now he can't cast any of them.
It's funny that just last game we saw Owen Turtenwald being the person that's able to make colors difficult for his opponent with Blood Moon. This time round, a Blood Moon might actually be kind of welcome if Paolo Vitor Damarosa chose to cast it.
Yeah, I suspect Paulo doesn't have Blood Moon because he's playing 3 colors. He might have a couple against the unfair decks, but not against Affinity.
Affinity, the other deck which sometimes brings in Blood Moon.
Yeah, it's not usually a good look to bring in Blood Moons against decks that are bringing in Blood Moons.
Spell Snare there, an effective answer to that Vault Scourge. It was not able to come back. Mike Cigrist, though, still having to pay the 2 life because he didn't have access to colored mana. And now going down single digits from that attack, and a Deceiver X. What am I saying?
Spellsky.
Spellsky, there we go. Coming down for Paolo Vitor
Which
Damarosa.
doesn't have an immediate effect, but it does mean that if Cigrist does draw this red mana, the first Galvanic Blast has to be pointed at the Spellsky. Paulo's on the land destruction plan. He's knocked down a bunch of Nexi. Apollo doesn't have a lot left, though. He's got a Dismember in his hand that he just drew, and he's got this Exarch and the Spellskite, but it's not a super fast clock, and it doesn't actually answer very many more of Cigrist's cards. If Cigrist can start casting his spells, I think he still has got a very legitimate shot to win this game.
Yeah, this is very close.
So Paul has to decide if he wants to point this Dismember anywhere. The good thing about poison damage is you can take up to 9 and not worry about it at all because it doesn't impact anything else. The good thing about Splinter Twin is sometimes you draw it and you win the game.
And lo and behold,
Seems like a better good thing.
There are more upsides to the second than the first.
and it looks like we've got a bit of synchronized magic going on just as that match finished. Our other match in the feature match area also complete. Martin Dang is now our King of the Hill, the winner of Pro Tour earlier this season, and Seth Manfield not able to keep that seat. As powerful as he was in the Modern Masters draft, once it turned around to Modern, even though we had Hexproof in there, looked like a powerful deck for the field, not quite able to perform in this feature match area.
Yeah, we saw 2 Hexproof decks lose already, and I'm curious how the other 2 did.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's one of those ones that there are different schools of thought, I suppose, when it comes to decks to choose for this sort of a field. Do you go for the very powerful but quite niche strategy, or do you go for something more general? We saw there in this case that Paolo Vittorio Damarosa wanted to just play the deck he was comfortable with. Andre Strasky wanted to play the deck he was comfortable with, and it looks like that might actually be a great plan.
Yeah, I think if you can predict the field well, then one of these niche decks can be very, very good.
But that is the end of our round 4, and we've got plenty more information for you. So we're going to send things back to the news desk, but do stay with us and come join us for round 5 of the World Championship right here.
Thanks so much to Tim Willoughby, Jackie Lee and Louis Scott Vargas. The first round of Modern, the first of 4. 1 down, 3 to go. Do you like card previews? Would you like to find out more about Battle for Zendikar? I thought you might. Next round, at the end of round 5, we will be right here bringing you a brand new card from Battle for Zendikar. You might want to take a look at the end of round 5. Right now, though, we're heading towards the end of round 4, and why don't we take a look in round 4 at 4 from the floor.